The Olympic Games are meant to celebrate unity, excellence, and the triumph of the human spirit, but history has also witnessed moments of unimaginable tragedy. In Part 2, we revisit 5 of the most horrifying tragedies ever to cast a shadow over the Olympic stage. The 1972 Summer Olympics were intended to symbolize renewal. For the first time since the propaganda-soaked 1936 Summer Olympics, the Games had returned to German soil. West Germany aimed to present a democratic, peaceful contrast to the shadow of Adolf Hitler's Berlin spectacle. Organizers promoted the event as the Cheerful Games, investing heavily in presentation while deliberately keeping security light, unarmed, and unobtrusive. The decision was meant to signal openness. Instead, it created vulnerabilities that would be exploited in devastating fashion. In the early hours of September 5th, 8 militants affiliated with Black September infiltrated the Olympic Village. Scaling a fence in athletic attire and carrying stolen keys, they forced entry into the quarters of the Israeli team at 31 Connolly Strasse. Inside, wrestling referee Josef Gutfreund and coach Moshe Weinberg confronted the intruders. Weinberg was shot during the struggle. As chaos unfolded, the attackers rounded up athletes and coaches, killing Weinberg and weightlifter Josef Romano when resistance was attempted. Romano's body was left as a warning. 9 Israelis were taken hostage. While 2 lay dead inside the village, International Olympic Committee President Avery Brundage insisted the Games continue. The attackers demanded the release of more than 200 Palestinians held in Israeli prisons, as well as the liberation of German extremists Andreas Bader and Ulrike Meinhof. They also requested transport to a Middle Eastern destination. Negotiations stretched through the day as the world watched live television coverage. A planned rescue inside the village was abandoned when authorities realized police movements were being broadcast globally. By evening, believing they had secured safe passage, the militants escorted their bound and blindfolded captives onto buses that transported them to helicopters. The aircraft flew to Fürstenfeldbruck Air Base, where German police had prepared an ambush. What followed became a case study in catastrophic miscalculation. The snipers deployed were inadequately trained, poorly positioned, and lacked communication equipment. They carried assault rifles rather than precision sniper weapons, and armored vehicles meant to support the operation were delayed in traffic. On the runway sat a Boeing 727 staffed by police officers disguised as flight crew, intended to overpower the attackers once they boarded. However, those officers abandoned the aircraft before the helicopters arrived. When 2 militants inspected the empty plane and recognized the trap, gunfire erupted. A prolonged exchange followed in darkness after floodlights were shot out. The Israeli hostages, bound inside the helicopters, were defenseless. Shortly after midnight on September 6th, the situation deteriorated fatally. A grenade was thrown into one helicopter, killing nearly all aboard. In the other aircraft, a gunman fired at close range, murdering the remaining hostages. By 12:30 a.m., the shooting ended. 11 Israeli athletes and coaches were dead, along with 1 German police officer. 5 of the attackers were killed. 3 were captured. For the first time in Olympic history, the Games were suspended for 24 hours. At a memorial service, Brundage declared that competition would resume, a decision that drew criticism worldwide. Many believed the symbolic weight of Jewish bloodshed on German soil demanded deeper reflection. Subsequent German inquiries concluded the attack had been unavoidable, despite evidence that security analyst Georg Sieber had earlier outlined a scenario eerily similar to the actual assault. His warnings had been dismissed as incompatible with the desired atmosphere of relaxed hospitality. In October 1972, a Lufthansa aircraft was hijacked, and the 3 surviving militants were released by West German authorities in exchange for hostages. The speed of the deal fueled suspicions of political expediency. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir authorized Operation Wrath of God, a covert campaign targeting those responsible. One institutional outcome of the tragedy was the formation of GSG-9, an elite counterterrorism force created to prevent similar failures. Yet, no reform could undo the human cost. The Munich Massacre permanently altered the Olympic movement. Security at international sporting events was transformed, and the illusion that the Games existed outside geopolitics was shattered. What was meant to celebrate unity became a grim reminder that even the world's most hopeful gatherings are not immune to violence. In the early hours of July 27, 1996, celebration turned to chaos at the 1996 Summer Olympic Games in Atlanta. What was meant to be a night of music and unity inside Centennial Olympic Park became one of the most horrifying moments in Olympic history. An anonymous voice called 911 with a chilling warning. "There's a bomb in Centennial Park. You have 30 minutes." The call, later traced to a nearby payphone, set off a frantic but incomplete evacuation. 22 minutes later, at 1:25 a.m., a 40-pound pipe bomb detonated in the crowded park, sending shrapnel tearing through the night. Panic erupted. Screams replaced laughter. Bodies fell where families had gathered to celebrate the world coming together in peace. 2 lives were lost as a direct result of the blast. Alice Hawthorne, a 44-year-old mother from Albany, Georgia, was killed instantly. Turkish cameraman Melih Uzunyoğlu died of a heart attack while rushing to capture footage of the unfolding tragedy. More than 100 others were injured, many struck by metal fragments that ripped through flesh and bone. The Olympic spirit, so carefully staged for global television, was shattered in seconds. In the immediate aftermath, a security guard named Richard Jewell was hailed as a hero. He had spotted a suspicious backpack beneath a bench and alerted authorities, helping to clear part of the area before the explosion. But within days, the narrative twisted. On July 30th, citing an unnamed source, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution identified Jewell as a suspect. The hero became the target. For weeks, Jewell endured intense scrutiny from federal investigators and relentless media coverage. His name was dissected across headlines. His character was questioned on national television. Though he repeatedly denied involvement, the damage was done. The presumption of innocence seemed to vanish under the glare of cameras. On October 26, 1996, the FBI and U.S. Attorney Kent Alexander formally cleared Jewell in what became an extraordinary public acknowledgement of wrongful suspicion. Jewell later filed lawsuits against several media outlets and government entities. Some, including CNN, reached settlements with him, but reputations, once fractured so publicly, rarely return untouched. The real perpetrator remained at large. On February 2, 1998, authorities named Eric Robert Rudolph as a suspect in the Olympic Park bombing. Rudolph was also linked to other attacks, including bombings at abortion clinics and a nightclub. By October 14, 1998, he was formally charged in connection with the Olympic attack. 2 years later, in November 2000, federal grand juries in Atlanta and Alabama indicted him on 23 charges spanning multiple bombings. Rudolph evaded capture for years, hiding in the mountains of North Carolina. His arrest finally came on May 31, 2003, when a rookie police officer apprehended him in Murphy, North Carolina. The long manhunt was over. On April 13, 2005, Rudolph pleaded guilty to the Olympic Park bombing and 3 other attacks. In an 11-page statement, he attempted to justify the violence by citing opposition to abortion. Months later, during his sentencing on August 22, 2005, Rudolph apologized to his victims and their families for the Olympic bombing. The court showed no leniency. He received 4 consecutive life sentences plus 120 years in federal prison for the Atlanta area bombings, along with 2 additional life terms for the Alabama clinic attack. Nearly 2 decades later, the legal chapter closed further. On February 12, 2024, judges from the 11th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that Rudolph could not challenge his life sentences, binding him permanently to the terms of his 2005 guilty plea. The 1996 Olympic Park bombing remains a dark scar on the history of the Games, a reminder that even events designed to symbolize unity and global harmony are not immune to hatred and extremism. What should have been remembered solely for athletic triumph became forever intertwined with tragedy, injustice, and the painful lesson of how quickly celebration can turn into catastrophe. Even at the highest level of preparation, Olympic athletes are not invincible. Years of discipline, training, and sacrifice cannot always protect the human body from its limits. That harsh truth became painfully clear at the 1912 Summer Olympics, when a young Portuguese marathoner named Francisco Lázaro made history in the most tragic way, becoming the first athlete in the modern Olympic era to die during the Games. Lázaro arrived in Stockholm with promise and pride. At just 22 years old, he was already a three-time national champion in Portugal. Though talented and determined, he was not a full-time professional athlete. Like many competitors of his era, he balanced sport with survival. By day, he worked as a carpenter in a car factory to support himself. By evening, he trained relentlessly, chasing the dream of Olympic glory. On paper and in appearance, he was fit and strong. He even carried medical certification confirming he was healthy enough to compete. On July 14, 1912, Lázaro stepped onto the marathon course with the world watching. The race began under punishing summer heat, conditions that would test even the most seasoned runners. As the miles stretched on, signs of distress began to surface. At the halfway point, observers noticed he appeared unwell. Still, he pressed forward, determined to finish. But determination can only push the body so far. After running roughly 30 kilometers, close to 19 miles, Lázaro collapsed on the course. He was rushed to Seraphim Hospital, unconscious and in critical condition. Despite medical efforts, he never regained consciousness. The following morning, he was pronounced dead. The marathon had claimed its first life in the modern Olympic era. In the aftermath, questions swirled. The oppressive heat was undoubtedly a major factor, but reports suggest Lázaro may have unknowingly worsened his condition. Believing it would improve his performance, he had coated his body in wax, or possibly grease, before the race. The idea was simple, but dangerously flawed. By reducing sweat loss, he hoped to conserve fluids and energy. Instead, the coating likely prevented his body from cooling itself properly. When he collapsed, his body temperature reportedly reached 106 degrees Fahrenheit. Medical explanations have varied over the years, citing heat exhaustion, sunstroke, cardiac complications, and possible electrolyte imbalance. Whatever the precise combination, the result was fatal. His body simply could not withstand the strain. The shock rippled far beyond the marathon course. Fellow athletes, officials, and spectators were stunned. The Olympic Games were meant to showcase human excellence, not human vulnerability. Lázaro's death forced a sobering realization. Even the strongest competitors are subject to the unforgiving forces of nature and physiology. In Stockholm, approximately 23,000 people gathered at the Olympic Stadium for a memorial service the weekend after his passing. It was a powerful tribute to a young man whose Olympic dream ended in tragedy. A collection was taken for his widow, raising around $3,800, a significant sum at the time. When his body returned to Portugal, thousands more attended his funeral, honoring him not only as an athlete, but as a national figure whose sacrifice would forever mark Olympic history. Francisco Lázaro's death became a turning point. In later years, race organizers would take greater precautions regarding extreme heat, hydration, and athlete safety. His story stands as both a warning and a memorial, a reminder that behind every Olympic competitor is a fragile human body pushing against its limits. The Olympic motto celebrates striving, faster, higher, stronger. But Lázaro's fate revealed a truth rarely spoken aloud. Sometimes the pursuit of greatness carries risks that even champions cannot outrun. Every 4 years, the Olympic Games promise spectacle, the world's finest athletes gathering to test the limits of human strength and endurance. We expect perfection, bodies honed by years of sacrifice, performances polished by relentless training. And most of the time, that's exactly what we see. But the Olympics have also carried a darker undercurrent. Even at the peak of physical fitness, athletes remain human, vulnerable to injury, illness, and in rare, devastating cases, death. One of the most controversial tragedies unfolded at the 1960 Summer Olympics with the death of Danish cyclist Knud Enemark Jensen. Just 23 years old, Jensen was considered one of Denmark's brightest cycling prospects. Earlier that year, he had helped secure a silver medal for his country at the Nordic Championships, fueling hopes of Olympic success. On August 26, 1960, Jensen lined up for the grueling 100-kilometer team time trial under a brutal Roman sun. Temperatures soared to 104 degrees Fahrenheit. The heat alone was punishing enough to force 31 riders out of the race with heat stroke. Still, the Danish team pressed on, even after one teammate dropped out. With roughly 8 kilometers remaining, Jensen told his teammates he felt dizzy. Soon after, he slipped into a semi-conscious state, struggling to keep pace. Teammates tried to steady him, one holding his shirt, another spraying water over him. For a brief moment he appeared to rally. Then, suddenly, he lost consciousness and crashed hard onto the scorching asphalt. He was transported first to the finish area and then to a military medical tent, where conditions were reportedly even hotter than outside. At 3:30 p.m., Knud Enemark Jensen was pronounced dead. The tragedy should have been simple: a young athlete overcome by extreme heat. Instead, it spiraled into decades of controversy. Rumors quickly spread that Jensen had used performance-enhancing drugs. His team trainer admitted giving riders Roniacol, a vasodilator intended to improve blood circulation. At the time, anti-doping policies were still in their infancy, and suspicion was high. Influential voices within the International Olympic Committee suggested amphetamines may have played a role, despite no concrete evidence. In March 1961, 3 Italian doctors conducted an autopsy. Their findings were clear. Jensen had suffered heat stroke and fractured his skull in the fall. No drugs were found in his system. Helmets were not mandatory at the time, making the fatal head injury tragically plausible. Yet the doping narrative refused to die. For years, Jensen's name became shorthand in debates about banned substances. Even into the 1970s, claims persisted that he had overdosed. It wasn't until 2001 that one of the prominent officials who had publicly blamed drugs admitted he had seen no autopsy evidence supporting that claim. By then, the myth had lingered for over 4 decades. Jensen was not the first athlete to die during the modern Olympics. That grim distinction belongs to Portuguese marathon runner Francisco Lázaro at the 1912 Summer Olympics. Lázaro collapsed roughly 30 kilometers into the race in Stockholm and died the next day. Theories ranged from meningitis to heart problems to heat exhaustion. Some accounts suggest he coated his body in wax to prevent sunburn, possibly impairing his ability to sweat and cool down. Other tragedies followed across Olympic history. At the 2010 Winter Olympics, Georgian luger Nodar Kumaritashvili was killed during a high-speed training crash. Launched from his sled at nearly 90 miles in 1992, Swiss speed skier Nicolas Bochete died after colliding with a snow vehicle hidden beyond a jump. During the 2016 Paralympics in Rio, Iranian cyclist Bahman Golbarnehid suffered a fatal crash while racing downhill. And beyond competition accidents, the Olympic stage has witnessed acts of violence, most notably at the 1972 Summer Olympics, where 11 Israeli athletes and coaches were killed in a terrorist attack, a tragedy that reshaped security at global sporting events forever. Each of these stories shattered the illusion that the Olympics are purely celebratory. For teammates, families, and spectators, the Games were instantly transformed from arenas of triumph into scenes of mourning. The image of elite athletes can make tragedy feel almost impossible. They appear superhuman, faster, stronger, untouchable. But history reminds us otherwise. Heat, speed, illness, human error, and violence have all pierced the Olympic dream. Behind every uniform and national flag stands a person chasing greatness. And sometimes, heartbreakingly, that pursuit comes at the highest cost. A heart-stopping silence swept across the slopes of the Sochi 2014 Winter Paralympics when American sit-skier Tyler Walker suffered a terrifying crash during the men's sitting downhill event. What began as a showcase of speed, skill, and courage at the Rosa Kuter Alpine Resort quickly turned into a scene of concern as the 27-year-old athlete lost control at blistering speed. Witnesses watched in disbelief as Walker cartwheeled violently down the course, his body and equipment tumbling again and again against the unforgiving snow. Traveling at speeds that can approach 100 kilometers per hour, sit-skiers push the boundaries of gravity and balance. But in a split second, the razor-thin margin between mastery and disaster vanished. Walker eventually came to a stop, lying motionless on the slope as medical teams rushed to his side. The tension was palpable. Spectators, fellow competitors, and coaches could only wait. Soon after, a message from United States Paralympics offered a wave of relief. Walker was stable and conscious in hospital. The update, shared widely across social media, reassured fans that although the crash was severe, the athlete was fighting. The downhill course that day had already proven punishing. Competition in the men's 22-athlete sitting class was halted repeatedly as 9 competitors crashed out, an unusually high number that underscored the difficulty and danger of the event. Sit skiers race using a bucket-style seat mounted on a single ski, steering with handheld outriggers that resemble shortened ski poles with small skis attached. It is a remarkable blend of precision engineering and athletic bravery. These athletes rely almost entirely on upper body strength, balance, and split-second reflexes to navigate steep descents and sharp turns. For Walker, high-speed crashes are an unfortunate chapter in an otherwise inspiring career. Earlier in the season, he had also endured a heavy fall in Sochi that forced him to miss the Super G competition and prematurely end his campaign. Yet resilience defines elite athletes, and Walker's response to setbacks has consistently reflected that spirit. Before the Paralympic Games, he had delivered an emphatic statement at the NORAM Cup, capturing both the slalom and giant slalom titles. His dominance did not end there. At an IPC fixture on home snow, the American squad delivered a commanding performance, amassing an extraordinary 34 medals. Walker once again swept the slalom and giant slalom events, reinforcing his status as one of the team's brightest stars. He was not alone in shining. Fellow sit skier and training partner Laurie Stevens, herself a Super G bronze medalist in Sochi, delivered standout performances with victories in the giant slalom and slalom at the NORAM Cup, followed by a silver medal in Aspen. Their partnership on and off the slopes has long symbolized the depth and camaraderie within the U.S. adaptive skiing program. Other American athletes added to the medal surge. Jamie Stanton claimed gold in the men's standing slalom at the Cup event, competing against strong contingents from Canada and Japan. Thomas Walsh triumphed in the giant slalom at the IPC competition. Kevin Burton, Brian Follett, Stephanie Jallin, and Danelle Umstead also stood atop the podium across the 2 events, illustrating the breadth of American talent in adaptive alpine skiing. Looking ahead, the international season promises little respite. Another IPC event is scheduled at Winter Park, Colorado, in early January, followed immediately by the World Cup opener in La Molina, Spain. The circuit will then move to Tignes and St. Moritz before culminating in the World Championships in Panorama, British Columbia, from late February through early March. For now, however, the spotlight remains on Walker's recovery. Alpine skiing, particularly in the sitting discipline, is as unforgiving as it is exhilarating. Every racer understands the risks when they push out of the start gate. Speed is both their weapon and their adversary. Tyler Walker's crash was a stark reminder of the peril woven into the pursuit of Paralympic glory. Yet it also highlighted something equally powerful: the resilience of athletes who refuse to be defined by falls. Stable and conscious after a harrowing accident, Walker's story, like his career, is one of courage under pressure. And in the world of adaptive sport, that courage is often the greatest victory of all.